I can't believe it. Those madmen actually did it. They made an underwater level that's actually fun. Huh.
This video was sponsored by Genshin Impact. I know, I can't believe it myself.
My journey through Genshin was definitely a lot different from that of most people. While everyone was getting into their third year of playing this game, I only got to try it for the first time. And so while everyone was dealing with the twists and turns of Sumeru, I was right here. In Mondstadt, which is still my favorite zone of Genshin Impact. Well, formerly favorite, but we'll get to that. Anyway, after nearly a year of going through the game at my own pace, I learned a great deal about what makes Genshin stick around so well. And why, for example, in 2022, it won the Gamer's Choice Award. Of course, back then, I still haven't even tried the game, so it was a surprise to me. But now, I think I understand why people keep coming back to Genshin. And above that, with the recent release of the 4.0 update featuring Fontaine. The game got some really interesting updates which make the base gameplay more enjoyable, and that's without most people even realizing it. Now, at first, even though I have already spent a lot of time in Fontaine, and that is on stream and off stream, I didn't think I would have a chance to talk about any of this. But then, as Genshin's 3rd anniversary drew near, to my surprise, I got approached by HoYoverse and was asked, "Hey, would you like to talk about your experience with Fontaine?" Well, would I? And yes, don't worry, I am allowed to be critical as well. So today, let's talk about Genshin Impact again. And specifically, let's talk about how Fontaine drew the crowds back. But also how Fontaine gave us a lot of technical upgrades without anyone realizing it. The first thing that's going to get you in Fontaine are the aesthetics. As I mentioned, Mondstadt, formerly my favorite region, was beaten by Fontaine for many reasons. As we walk around, you might notice the influence from the French culture, which is mostly gonna be shoved into your eardrums as all the characters talk about Monsieur Neuvillette.
Monsieur Neuvillette.
Monsieur Neuvillette.
Monsieur Neuvillette.
But besides the names, it is also the music and the technology. I was referring to the aqueducts. I'm European, they mean a lot to me. Now, the French aesthetics is a great theme on its own. But HoYoverse took it all into a cooler place with a few twists. For once, while the capital city of Fontaine is gorgeous, they mixed it up with some steampunky inventions which make the city feel alive, but they are sure to circle back to the French culture behind every corner. Like, really? What's great is that this entire city also has a dark underside, which gives the entire area some contrast. So while the top side is about perfection, automation and very vibrant clothing choices, the bottom side might be dealing with groups related to the local mafia. I also found this turtle here. It doesn't talk or do anything, it's just here. Is this a reference to the French silent movies? Anyway, we can then walk outside into those lush green fields and those jagged mountains. Oh, and what's that? A floaty, watery structure? Don't worry about that one, that's future content. Even though it was advertised among all the release content. What also ties this entire place together is the introduction. Ah, so you're finally awake. You hop onto a boat, ride through one of the aqueducts, and a new mysterious creature tells you about where you're heading. It really feels like you are touring a new place, and it's great. Huh. You remind me of someone. Ah. But of course, good aesthetics can only get you so far. So now, let's have a look at what you can actually do here. If there is something everyone can agree Genshin is good at, it is combat. I have never seen combat as snappy, fluid and reliable as this. And in Fontaine, this absolutely remains the same. It still remains the strongest feature of this game. Which is great because without good gameplay, the players wouldn't stick around for anything else. However, for the longest time, the player base always brought up one critique. The combat is stellar, but once you get into the endgame, with enough time, even the hardest challenges, such as the Spiral Abyss, become a very easy bread and butter. Once you start reaching the top floors, you'll realize that everything is a DPS check rather than a skill check. And you can always overcome a DPS check by simply playing more and farming more. So a lot of players are still looking for that satisfying challenge to put their characters to the test. With that said, occasionally there are some events which are designed to give you really hard fights. But so far, floor 12 of the Spiral Abyss is still the top challenge to go for. Which brings us to the first new feature you might not know about. While we are not getting any new instanced forms of combat, funnily enough, Fontaine entertained the idea of that kind of challenge with optional world bosses. And I'm not talking about the elemental cubes or the flowers. I'm talking about Vivian of the Lake. A totally random enemy in the middle of nowhere who is really hard to beat and who gives you just a few primos. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, outside of the outdoor bosses that give you ascension materials, Genshin never had anything like this. That's unless you count the original Ruined Guard from 1.0. And that one was only difficult in the eyes of 1.0 players. These days you sneeze and it vaporizes. How did people use it for a DPS check back in the day? Anyway, what's awesome about Vivian, as well as the other 7 world bosses, is that they are a skill check, not a DPS check. They have millions of health, they deal a lot of damage, but unlike the bosses in the Abyss, there is no timer here. Which means that for most players, those fights are doable as long as you are good enough at dodging their attacks. Meaning that your DPS only shortens the fight. You are not required to reach certain DPS to beat it. Now of course, Vivian is considered to be the hardest one, and that's for an obvious reason. She literally has more health than multiple of the characters who shaped the world combined. However, remember that since these mini-bosses are outdoors, you can use all of your consumables to make the fight easier. Which is why, being the crazy person I am, I made up a personal challenge to beat it without any consumables or resurrections. And honestly, I had an absolute blast doing this. So you know what? Even though we didn't get a massive new combat feature, similar to something like the Swarm in Honkai Star Rail, which is something I would very much appreciate in Genshin, they still gave people an underappreciated challenge to complete. And what's awesome is that as you head into 4.1, you'll find more of these scattered around the world. But I won't spoil those for you. Now, outside of combat, since the first teasers Fontaine got, the entire region was advertised around swimming, which raised a lot of eyebrows for a very simple reason. No matter where you look throughout the video game history, there has never been a water level that's fun. Which is why many minds were blown away when people found out that swimming in Fontaine is awesome. I honestly couldn't believe it. It is as if gaming in its entirety broke a curse. You simply jump into the water, dive below, and control your characters like you are flying a plane. No, not that kind of a plane. And you don't even worry about a breath meter. What's even more awesome is that besides just swimming around and collecting items, there is a whole new score of minigames that make the entire exploration a lot more interesting. You tap into the power of some sea creatures to murder other sea creatures, as well as mini-bosses. Ocean life can be morbid. But you also use those powers to solve puzzles, which is followed by some time trials and simplified combat. Overall, combined with the fluid underwater movement, it really feels like a whole new exploration minigame inside Genshin. And again, I can't stretch how surprisingly great of a feature this turned out to be. Simply said, all the swimming is a big win. Also, the censorship on all the characters when they are swimming is pretty funny. And speaking of swimming around, another great upgrade which Fontaine gets over other regions is that exploration is simply open for you to do whatever you want. In my opinion, the biggest flaw Sumeru had is that many of the exploration minigames were locked behind side quests. You always had to find a side quest that would give you special power that would allow you to solve a puzzle. Like, I still don't know what these things are. I can't hit them, I can't blow them away, and they hit back. I don't think I want to know anymore. In Fontaine, you just go there and solve puzzles, which is absolutely in the spirit of exploration. You are supposed to go on your own adventure, not where the side quests point you to go. Now, of course, some areas are still locked behind side quests, but that's mostly to prevent story spoilers. So for the most part, even exploration is just better in Fontaine. Not to mention that, again, swimming just became a whole new tool. But simple game mechanics is not where the surprising aspects of swimming end. Because you see, a big reason why all of this feels like a mystical experience is the music. So let's talk about that one. The music of Genshin Impact is something that really stood up throughout the entire video game industry. I mean, people are excited to attend their entire massive concerts. From great boss themes that set up epic fights, to chill ambient music that plays while you're exploring, to my favorite combat theme called Beats of Water Drops. But even that one cannot beat the Song of My People. The music here is simply good, but it wasn't until Fontaine that the devs realized that they can do something cooler with it. Mainly, there are two new features you might not know about. The first one occurs when you are swimming down below in the ruins below Fontaine. In some of these places, you can swap between swimming and running around in pockets of air. There, you may notice that the music adapts to whatever state you are in. When you are swimming, you get a very dreamy version of the music. But the moment you emerge in a pocket of air while you are still underwater, the underwater theme smoothly transitions into an instrumental version of that music. This is achieved by playing two tracks in the background that are synced up. And depending on what state you are in, you mute one of these. Genshin is not the first game to do this, not by a mile. But it is a really cool upgrade to their musical engine. The other cool musical feature I noticed in Fontaine is the fountain. Did you notice it reacts to the music that's currently playing? During night, it is synced up with the peaceful music. And during the day, it gets more dynamic with the daytime music. I don't believe this is a dynamic sound wave that reads the music. I think it is a pre-programmed animation that just syncs up. Now, I noticed some of you guys started leaving because you think I'm a musical nerd, so let's keep going. I didn't even get to talk about how the music is themed around the French bal musette. Oh no, please come back! Now, before we dive into what I consider to be the strongest element of Fontaine, I really want to highlight some of the smaller features that get overlooked. It seems like with 4.0, the devs got a really good read on their audience. And so, they just made all the aspects of your daily gameplay better. Mainly, did you notice how easy and quick your commissions in Fontaine are? All the combat commissions are quick, all the talking commissions are short. And even the underwater segments take like 60 seconds. My favorite part of the new daily quests is the one where you learn how to make coffee. And depending on whichever one you are making, you need to follow the instructions to make a cappuccino, latte or espresso. Okay, now we're getting a little bit more Italian. I love this one because you could say I am a bit of a coffee expert myself. In Fontaine, you can easily do all your dailies in like 3 minutes. Compared to Inazuma, where it takes 3 minutes to just travel between the islands. But speaking of navigation, they did it! Finally, they split the map into layers to deal with Genshin's verticality. Partially, I believe that this was done because they just ported the tech over from Honkai Star Rail. But also it makes sense why they pushed for it for Fontaine. Because Fontaine has all the underground parts below the city. I mean, for those of you who completed the 4.1 content. Can you imagine going through that place without this map? Lastly, we should mention all the updates to the character selection, be it new animations or entire new backgrounds. I'm really glad I started playing Genshin before this update, because now I can really appreciate what an upgrade it is. But since we're talking about characters, let's talk about what surprised me the most. The very reason why I plan on sticking with this game for the foreseeable future. And that's the story. When 4.0 came out, I had my fair share of expectations. Up until that point, the story of Genshin had its ups and downs. There were some amazing memorable moments, as well as parts that dragged. So I thought Fontaine would be a mix of all of those. You know, great engaging parts with quite a bit of downtime between them. Just like pretty much every region that came before. But somehow, that didn't really happen. Straight from the very beginning, the story has a great introduction for the Archon, it follows up with a mystery, but somehow the characters don't just talk through the story. They put you in the middle of it to solve it. And you do it by engaging with the entire story with a detective minigame. That's really what sets Fontaine apart from what came before. It is not just a story that you watch like an anime. It is a story you deal with yourself, even if it is just a series of illusions of choice. And what's crazy is that in Fontaine, Genshin dealt with the one critique I have always had. As you may know, one of the things I didn't really like about Genshin's story is that it always felt like Genshin was afraid of killing important characters. In the main story arc, it is extremely rare to see. And as a result, you just never feel like any of the main characters are ever in danger. I mean, the plot armor was always there. The only time meaningful death is a bit more frequent is in the side quests, especially around the Sumeru desert, but unvoiced side quests are a debate of its own. Let's just say there are a lot of people who are still waiting for a skip button. So yeah, while those stories are awesome, they are not the preferred way of storytelling. Look, you should learn from our mushroomy brethren, at least they give us a lot of rewards. So, for Fontaine, without spoiling anything, I just want to say that the story here is not afraid of going dark. It took me by surprise, but it feels like the story matured with the audience. Oh, and I almost forgot, it seems like Genshin is borrowing some lessons from Honkai Star Rail. Not just with the pacing of the stories, but also with the tech. They have a new tech that allows you to draw additional models as props on top of the normal models. It's kinda hard to explain without going deeper into how models actually work. But they can use this new tech to have more emotions in the story. They first tested this around the end of Sumeru, but now, without any spoilers, it is returning in Fontaine. But the main reason why this system is so awesome is because it allows Paimon to have a mustache. I mean, she already had the accent, so now she's fully in her role.
Novelette?
Next, on top of all of this, I have to bring up the humor. In the past, not everyone enjoyed Paimon explaining absolutely everything and also joking about everything. To which I am very happy to announce, things are absolutely amazing in Fontaine. She really feels like a character that is engaged in the story, not just a tool to give the traveler a voice. And I hope she keeps this direction going forward. So overall, connected with how the story is paced and how it lets you interact with it, Fontaine easily has the best main storyline out of the entirety of Genshin. And what's great about this is that the mysteries ramp up through the initial two parts of the main storyline, and it ends with a cliffhanger that sets you up for 4.1. And 4.1 delves into its own mysteries. I mean, I'll tell you what, I did not expect us to go on a jailbreak. Not to mention, that patch introduced some really badass characters. And surprisingly enough, most of them are male. So to complete my manly team, I need all of them. The issue is, for some of them, I have no idea how to pronounce their names. And they have more that are part of the story that are still to come. But also, Hutao's banner is back. So I need the Staff of Homa for Zhongli. That's on top of the other characters. Yeah, I'm getting broke.
Again, massive thanks to Genshin Impact for sponsoring this video. It is definitely not something I expected, but I have to say, so far I've had a lot of fun in Fontaine. Just remember that Genshin Impact is playable on PC, mobile or console. And the shortest trip to begin your exploration would be using the link in the description. Also, how many of you noticed I got a haircut halfway through this video?